All right, let's continue to this now. Israeli army said early Saturday that it was carrying out strikes in Syria after 2 rockets fired from the country fell into territory under its control. Syrian says 2 separate Israeli airstrikes targeted its territory late Thursday night, causing material damage. Now, Israel has carried out numerous airstrikes on regime-controlled areas of Syria throughout its 12-year civil war, claiming to target pro-Iran militia such as Lebanon's Hezbollah, which supports the Syrian army. According to a Syrian military intelligence source, strikes are believed to have targeted a Syrian army air defense base and a radar station in the Suweda province in the southwestern Syria. Meanwhile, Gaza residents say Israeli tanks pushed deeper into districts in central and southern Gaza overnight under heavy air and artillery fire. Fighting late on Friday and early Saturday was focused on Bureji, Nuseirat, Mogazi and Khan Yunis. Well, South Africa approached the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention, which respects to acts committed by Israel in the context of its attacks on Gaza. The government has raised concerns with the plight of civilians caught in the present Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip due to the indiscriminate use of force and forcible removal of inhabitants. South African government has repeatedly stated that it condemns all violence and attacks against all civilians, including Israelis. Now, let's discuss this. We're now joined via Teams by Professor Hennie Strydom Professor in International Law at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, thank you so much for your time and your patience this afternoon. Now, let's talk about this. I mean, this step by South Africa has garnered a lot of international attention. Help us unpack then, the significance of South Africa instituting proceedings against the state of Israel and the measures then it seeks from the court.
Yeah, I think this is a very important step taken by the South African government. And to understand the background, I have to mention that it's because of a provision in the Genocide Convention, which determines that when parties to that convention has a dispute concerning the interpretation and application of the convention, then any of the parties to that dispute may resort to the International Criminal Court for a International Court of Justice, for a decision in this regard. And that is the basis of South Africa's application. And the application has actually a two-pronged approach. Firstly, to ask the court to determine that Israel has a duty to prevent genocide under the the Genocide Convention, of which it is a party, like South Africa. And secondly, to determine that in the case of a failure to do so, that Israel must be held accountable and that certain remedies will follow from that. That is the one part, and that part of the application deals with the merits of the application. But then there's a very important second part of the application, namely South Africa's request that in the interim, while the court decides on the merits and first of all determines whether it has jurisdiction to hear the case, that it will sort of provide for interim measures. And interim measures under the statute of the International Court of Justice has the objective of protecting the civilians in the meantime. And I think that is the important part. And South Africa, in its application, has made it very clear that the civilian population in Palestine, and especially in Gaza, are facing severe conditions under the current military offensive. And secondly, that they need the protection of certain measures in order to prevent further atrocities to be committed and to prevent further hardship of being imposed upon them. And that is, I think, a very important step in order to come to the assistance of the civilians who, as we've seen according to the figures, bearing the brunt of the Israeli offensive at this point in time.
And Prof, I want you to just stay on that, the reference to the genocide. South Africa is saying that Israel has violated the UN's Genocide Convention and, of course, called for an expedited hearing. But Israel, of course, asking the court to reject this. I mean, what then legally constitutes genocide in as far as this issue is concerned? Because the question now is, how would Israel attempt to dispute this interpretation?
Well, it is clear, South Africa is not the only state which has referred to genocide either being committed or in the process of being committed, or that it is clear that certain facts indicate that there might be instances of genocide being committed. And of course, Israel in its response to that has disputed that. And of course, both rely on the Genocide Convention, which deals with what will constitute genocide, sort of the elimination of certain groups, political, racial, etc., ethnic groups. And it's because of that dispute concerning the interpretation of the Genocide Convention that this matter has gone to the court, because under the Genocide Convention, where there's a dispute between parties to the convention, one of them, or any one of them, will be entitled to refer the matter to the International Court of Justice. And that is the sort of very basis upon which South Africa has brought that case to the ICJ.
And Prof, another distinction I'd like you to just help us with, we already know that, of course, South African government has already filed a case at the International Criminal Court. Can you explain the difference in how this particular case in the ICC differs to that of the ICJ, for instance?
Certainly, in the case of the International Criminal Court application, that application has as its objective to determine which individuals are criminally responsible for certain atrocities that were committed and in violation of the statute. So it deals with a criminal responsibility matter. In the case of the case before the International Court of Justice, the idea is to hold the state of Israel accountable. And that is a sort of civil matter. It doesn't deal with the criminal responsibility of individuals. But it is an important move because it needs the interpretation of the International Court of Justice on, firstly, whether Israel has a duty to prevent genocide from happening, and then what measures it should have taken, and if it failed to take those measures, then it should be held accountable as a state under the Genocide Convention vis-a-vis Palestine and the Palestinian people. So that is, in short, the difference between the two cases that South Africa has become involved in.
And Prof, just a final question. Other countries, of course, have called what is currently happening in Gaza as genocide, obviously referencing to Israel's continuous bombardment. Would other countries also filing, cases in the International Court of Justice help advance South Africa's case at all?
Yes, of course. There's also the possibility of other countries intervening in this matter, which South Africa has brought to the case. So that is one of the mechanisms that the statute of the International Court of Justice provides for. And we have a similar incident in the case of the Ukraine war, where Ukraine brought a matter to the International Court of Justice, also asking for interim measures for the protection of civilians and various groups of people inside Ukraine against the offensive war, actually a war of aggression committed by Russia. And in that case, several countries have joined in the proceedings and also have submitted, the arguments to the court to assist the court in coming to a conclusion. So in this matter, in which South Africa is eminently involved in, other states may have that option to file complaints on their behalf in support in South Africa's case or otherwise. And of course, the more states coming forward on that basis, the more sort of force it will add to the arguments that South Africa has put forward in its application.
Prof, thank you so much for your analysis and your time here on the show. Professor Hennie Strydom, Professor International Law at the University of Johannesburg, there for us.